Hey, hello everybody. My name is Michael. I am a freelancer consultant, and most of my work is doing Angular and some Node JS. Today I'm going to talk about something a bit different. I'm going to talk about multiplayer game. How many of you have experience with game development? Nice. And multiplayer? OK. So what we're going to do today is going to be a quite simple game. I'm going to show you the game. We're going to break down the components. And then we're going to see how Angular helps us a bit about Firebase. So let's take a look about our demo, which is right here. So as you can see here, I have this very, very tiny cat. And he can push away those birds. I believe you can see, but this is a cat and this is a bird. And if we will have more players, we'll have more cats pushing the birds away. So this is basically the game. But let's dive right into it. OK. So when we are talking about developing a game, the first thing, we are focusing on web development. So everything is related to our browser. And we're going to have two things. The first thing is we're going to use Angular. We're going to use Angular to manage our application. Most game, or every multiplayer game, is both a game and an application. So we're going to have Angular, and you're going to have some game framework. We're going to choose a framework that will help us to write our game with as much ease as possible. So this is the client side. And of course, if we're talking about multiplayer, we're going to have a backend. So we don't need just a regular backend. We need something that is real time. We need to push data from our server to the client. So one player is doing some action. Another player should receive a notification that something had occurred. So we will find some way to do a real-time backend. And of course, database. Most games need a database. So this is the general architecture. So I said that we're going to choose a game framework. And what is that? What does that do? So every time that we are looking at an application, it has the traditional UI. It has a login form. You have the username. You have the password. You have the button. But once we're talking about a game, we don't have the traditional UI. We don't have the div, the span, the input. We have something else. So we need a library or a framework to support this UI. So this is a very basic requirement from our game library. The second thing that we need, which is very, very important, is that the physics engine. We have a lot of components. We have a lot of moving components in our game, especially if you're talking about multiplayer one. So you have two components probably colliding with each other. So we had the cat and we had the bird, and they collide with each other. And then we want to have some effect. I don't want to write physics code in my application. I love Angular, I love gaming, I don't love physics, so I have this physics game that is going to help me. And then everything that we're going to do is going to use animations. Everything that every component that moves with animation. So we need something to support that. Animations, we need it to be a fast rendering. We have a lot of assets to handle. And when I'm saying assets, I'm talking about images, videos, audio, things like that. And the last thing that I want my game framework to do for me is I want it to abstract away how the browser does render the game. Because I have generally two options. It could be an HTML canvas, and it could be WebGL. So those are two similar API, a bit different in their performance. But for me, I don't care how it's rendered as long as it's rendering well. And this is going to be the job of the game framework. OK, so choosing a game framework. So this is the four, I think, most common libraries out there. So we have Phaser, Unity, Create.js, Impact.js. There is so much out there that you can use. Personally, I like Phaser because it's free, it's simple to use, it has a very large community to support it, and this is what we are going to see today. So how do we render a game? So we have 4 phases, and this is specifically to Phaser, but most game framework, the flow is quite the same. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to preload. We are preloading assets, images, audio, videos, everything that you need to load, you are doing it in the preload. And then, after we finish with the preload, we have the create. Create actually takes an asset and create a component that will be rendered on the screen. So if I have my cat image, I want it to be now something that can move, something that can collide with other components. So the create transform assets into game objects. And this is the simple part. The update and the render is something that occurs every time. Every render cycle, we have update and we have render. So the render is quite simple. It takes the game objects and it renders them on the screen. The update is where we are making our game logic. So if somebody presses down, that means that we need to take the character down. The update will notify, let's move the character, and the render will render it. So let's assume that we have like a soccer game. So we have a little character that is playing soccer. And we loaded it in the preload, created the texture in the create, and now it's being rendered. And we have the judge. And now the player did something. He moved. So I pressed a button. In my update, I capture it, and I render it again. And then so on and so on. Any of you heard the terms FPS? Yeah, frame per second. This is it. How many times can you run update and render in a second? That will determine your FPS. So you probably want to be 60 or above. So this is a crucial 2 functions. Anytime your update or your render takes too much time, your game won't look smooth as it should. So this is the basic idea of Phaser. Okay, oh, and then he gets a ticket, of course. Okay, so how can we start? What should we do? So let's see some code. And here you can see I am in a component. This is an Angular 4 component, which implements some interface. And here I have this Phaser. So Phaser .game is actually going to create a new game. And when you create a game, you need to specify a few things. The first one is, what is the width and height of your game frame? Specifically here, I said take all the string. And then I need to say, how are you going to render? Are you going to use Canvas or WebGL? So here I let Phaser take this decision for me. It's actually have a fallback. It will start by trying to use WebGL. If it fails, it's going to Canvas. One problem with gaming is that we don't have much mobile devices that support WebGL, so you do need to support both WebGL and Canvas. Okay, and then we need to specify in the DOM where will you render your game. So you can see here in the HTML that I have a div, and this div is the place where I attach the DOM to the gaming rendering. Okay, so this is a very important place. And then we are going into preload. Preload is the function where we load assets. So I'm loading a Sprite Sheet, which is basically an image. Do you know what Sprite Sheet is? Okay, Sprite Sheet is a very, very cool thing. Let's say that you have a JavaScript code, and you have a lot of files. What do you do with them? You pack them, minify, and just you want to have a single file. So if we're talking about Sprite Sheet, we're talking about quite the same thing. We have a lot of images that we want to put in one place. So you can see here, this is our cat, and our cat have 12 images, and each image is pointing another step in our animation. So at the first 3 is going down and going left, and we have 3 images to have like an animation that we will see how we create. So when I'm loading a sprite sheet, I'm saying this is me, the main character, and I'm loading animals, and each box, each image, each unique image is 32 by 32 pixel, and I have in total 96 images in this sprite sheet. So after I did that, I loaded the sprite sheet, and I can start work with that. And then we have the create. In our create, we're going to see that I'm using the sprite sheet. If you remember, I used ME as the main character. Now I'm saying when you are doing, when you're actually going to render that, please put it in this X and XY. And now I'm going to set some attribute to this a game object. Remember, it's not. This is the point where I transform from an image into a game object. So I wanted to have some physics, and I chose arcade, which is a certain engine. We can choose some others if we wanted. And I'm going to define animations. So I have 4 animations, up, down, left, and right. And I'm saying that please start with the right animation. OK, so this is the basic settings that we did before we started to do anything. OK, so now we have an object that can be rendered. And we'll start by animating to the right. So let's have a quick look at our demo. OK. So you can see here that it's actually walking right, like that. OK? So now, after we did the create, we need to see the update. When we are updating, we are actually doing something. We are listening to what the user does, and we are trying to update the effect in the game. So we are looking if the user has just pressed the left. So is left is down right now? If so, please play the left animation and change the velocity. So velocity means speed. That means that I'm not actually, in my update, changing the position of the animal. What I'm doing is I'm setting a velocity which will say, please go in that direction at this speed. So this is the game and the physics engine that's working right now. If I had to actually set the X and Y myself, the position myself, I will have much more work to do. So this is a quite simple way for me to do that. The render function, so in my game we don't have a render function. That is because most game objects simply render by themselves. They don't need any instruction how to do that. So you may find yourself using special objects that you do need to have something related to their rendering, so you will override this method and do what you need. But basically, there is no reason to do that, usually. OK, so we saw the demo. So that's awesome. I have my game, and it's up and running. What do I need Angular? What its role in this app? So it's quite simple to understand, because Phaser will handle everything that is related to the game itself, to rendering the object, and actually the logic itself of the game. But you'll have a lot of other things that you need to do rather than the logic and the rendering. You're going to have to do something like login. So you want to do a login form. So the form, you don't want to do that by Phaser. You want to do that by HTML. Things like add, things like settings. Do you want to do to turn on the sound or not? Those things will probably be rendered by Angular. So if we're talking about Angular, let's see how we can combine the two. So Phaser is doing something really, really annoying. It's not exporting any module. So that means that Phaser will be available in the window object. It's actually setting itself as a global variable that you need to access somehow. So you can't require that as you would do, I don't know, as a Lodash or something like that. So that means that we need to declare a variable, and we will use that from the window object. OK, that's awesome. So we have access to it, but we need to make sure that we are adding the script of Phaser into our browser so it will download. So usually when we want to add something to our application, we would go to the index.html and add a script there. Since we're working with Angular 4 and Angular 4 CLI, we don't want to set things directly in the index.html because there is a chance it will be override when you are deploying a new version. So this is where we are using our Angular CLI. So those are the dependencies that we are looking for. So we have Phaser and Pixie and P2, that the dependencies of Phaser. If you're going to do that in the wrong order, that means you're going to set Pixie after Phaser, it's going to crash. So the order here is very important. OK, so we have Angular and we have Phaser, and they are working together. And it's a component. You can do anything that you could have done with the component, such as injecting dependencies that we will see in a second. OK, so just remember, Phaser is for the game, and Angular is for all the rest. Awesome. So what we've done till now, we created a game. So our game right now has nothing to do with multiplayer game. And because it has nothing to do with multiplayer game, we can see how Angular help us here. So this is where we want to find something that will have a real-time server and a DB, and which will be very, very easy to maintain and to work with. So if we are all using Google product, we can just go ahead and use Firebase. How many of you know Firebase? Some of you, OK. So it's a Google product. It's actually a database. And it's a wonderful database for gaming because it provides us with real-time notifications from my database. And if we're coming to think what we need from an online game, the only thing that I'm looking for is push notification every time something changes. I want to tell the database something had changed, and I want to get push notification, and that's about it. I don't need much more of that. So if we are not using a database that will send us notifications, that means we're going to create a backend with some technology that supports push notifications. I don't know, push to the client, maybe Socket.io or something like that. So Firebase is a great match here. So what it does, and we're going to see that in our code, we're going to initialize the database. We're going to get a list of data, and we are going to subscribe for changes. And this is all that we need to do. So let's just see it, if my computer will work. OK. So what we needed to do. The first thing that we needed to do, we needed to initialize Firebase. So just grab your database from NPM, of course, and initialize the database. And that's all you need to do in terms of configuring it. Those are pretty sensitive things, so everybody who's taking a picture, this is the time to take the picture, OK? Now, once I have initialized my database, I can just inject the database, get a reference to it, and what I'm going to say here, I'm going to say, please give me the list of my enemies. So, it's not working? Okay, oh, that's nice. Okay. So the DB list is actually when we get a reference to our enemies. Okay, and once we have this reference, we can do a couple of things. We can push, remove, and get changes. So you can see here that we have the subscribe function. Every time that anyone who is related to this database make a change, I'm going to get a notification. So if I push, I will get a notification. So if somebody else push or change or update, I will get a notification as well. So in our game, that means that every time I'm making a move, I'm going to update the position in my database. So if I update my position in my database and all of you get notification, all of you can render my character in the right place on your device. Okay, so this is actually why Firebase is so good for multiplayer games. So if we are talking about what we started off with the fact that we want something about gaming, and we want real-time backend, and we want a database. So Firebase, at this point, gives both of them. So it's a perfect match. OK, so we've done that, and we've done that. So we have a fully operational game. So we can just grab our code, deploy it, and we can all play. So thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy it.